Good morning and welcome to week 8 of our terrorism class. I am coming to you from Albuquerque today. As I mentioned a week or two ago, I have officially retired from the Los Angeles Police Department, and now I'm making my slow drive across the country to Smithfield, where I'll be taking over as a full-time position. So the next week or two, today and maybe next week, I'll be coming to you from the road, and then I'll be in Smithfield after that. So exciting times, a lot of changes, and thank you for joining me on this journey. Before I get into the material for this week, we got just a couple weeks left after this, so I put it in the announcements. So I wanted to say it here as well. Make sure you look ahead to next week's 4-week paper. It's only 4 pages. It's not super labor intensive, but I would encourage you to look ahead now instead of waiting until next week, so you have as much opportunity to create as quality a product as possible. If you wait until next week, you're just handcuffing yourself and giving yourself less time. You look at it now, start preparing, start researching, coming up with your ideas, and putting pen to paper. It's only going to make for a better paper. So I encourage you to, as soon as possible, start looking into that. Also, looking at the feedback that I've been giving on the discussion board posts, I encourage you to read the feedback that I provide. If you get, for instance, on the occasion that you get 100% on a discussion board, I probably won't put a lot of feedback. There's not a lot of feedback to give. But if you're getting something lower than 100% on your discussion board posts, I do put in there where you're losing your points. So I encourage you, read what I write on there and take it to heart. Heed the advice that I give you. If you're losing points because you're not using in-text citations, then go back and read what I wrote about in-text citations. Research them. Go to the reference materials that I put at the beginning of the semester on what an in-text citation is. Remember, everything you say in your writing has to be supported by documentation outside of your writing if it's not a commonly known subject. So there also has to be a reference attached to that in a reference list. So if you put 4 references in your reference list, you have to have at least 4 in-text citations in there. You can't just list 4 references and then put quotes in your discussion board post and not attribute those quotes to anybody, because then your reader won't know which of your 4 references this is coming from. Additionally, if you put references that are just cut and paste URL links or website links in your reference page, that's not a reference. That's just a website link. There's a specific APA format wherein it is dictated exactly how your reference list should be built. There's an anatomy of your reference list, and cut and pasting a website is not anywhere near what a reference should look like. So I encourage you, again, go back to the materials that I already posted at the beginning of the semester, do your own research, go to the Purdue OWL lab, the OWL online writing lab, and it will break down exactly what APA 7 requires and dictates for what a reference page should look like and what an in-text citation should look like. I say this now because as we get to the end of the semester, as I put in the feedback, the longer that the advice that I put in your feedback, the feedback that I write is not heeded, the more points you will lose. So it becomes more and more crucial, more and more critical for you to listen to the feedback that I give. Otherwise, if you're ignoring the feedback, you're going to lose more and more and more points, and it's only going to get worse as the next couple weeks proceed and we get close to the end of the semester. So I'd love to see each of you get as high a grade as possible. And the first step to that is looking at the feedback that I give and heeding the advice that I give. So this week we are talking about terrorism, and specifically in chapters 13 and 14, specifically in chapter 13, we're talking about Central and South American terrorism, and that inherently brings up the subject of narco-terrorism, and that's what I want to talk about today. It's narco-terrorism. So let me just start with the definition. Narco-terrorism, in our textbook, page 406, lays out the definition pretty well, and I'm just going to read it straight for you. Narco-terrorism can be considered as any terrorism conducted to further the aims of drug traffickers. It may include assassinations, extortions, hijackings, bombings, and kidnappings directed against judges, prosecutors, elected officials, or law enforcement agents, and general disruption of legitimate government to divert attention from drug operations. So all those words broken down, essentially violence to change behavior is what we've said terrorism is. In this case, the violence to change behavior is to change the enforcement behavior against narcotics related law enforcement. So that's essentially where the first time we hear this term narco-terrorism comes from Peru. The cartels in Peru, the drug cartels in Peru, decided to take the fight to the police instead of waiting for the police to arrest them. So as they saw these large anti-narcotics squads in Peru, instead of waiting for those squads to discover their land and where they're manufacturing the narcotics, they would start ambushing the police. So bringing violence to the police to discourage enforcement behaviors. And so that was in the 1980s. The term was reintroduced after 9/11 when there was kind of a merger between the war on terror and the war on drugs. There was a realization that terror and drugs had a direct connection. And that connection was manifest, one, when it came to the homeland security on the border, when when governmental organizations realized that a secure border would do one of two things. It would keep people who were bringing drugs in out, and it would also keep the drugs themselves out. So it would keep the violent people out as well as the product of the drugs themselves out. And so that merger, that idea that keeping the drugs and the people or combating the drugs and the people at the same time was a beneficial goal. As we proceeded into the war on terror and saw more of a military presence in Afghanistan, you see a lot more drug operations that were led in Afghanistan because of the opioid trade, the poppies and the heroin drug trade that was so rampant in Afghanistan. And so you see not only a war on terror when it came to military operations against terrorists, but also narcotics operations against the product that the terrorists were involved with. So there's a direct relationship, as I've said, between these organizations, these drug trades and the terrorists themselves, for one major purpose, one major reason. And that's because in order to be a successful, if you will, a terror organization, funding is necessary. Being a terrorist is not cheap. Bombs and travel and training has to be funded somehow. And one of the primary sources of funding that terror cells have found since 9/11 is using the drug trade to fund the terror trade. And so using these proceeds from drug sales to fund the operations of terror has become quite popular. So in that, not only in Afghanistan and the Middle East, where people may have stereotypically think of terrorism, harken back to what we just talked about, this narco-terrorism in Central and South America, where if you look at even, and I'll include North America in that as well, because in 2011, there was a bill introduced here in the United States that named 6 of the Mexican cartels as terror organizations. And these cartels were essentially just drug trade cartels, but because of the violence that they were perpetrating and being involved with, that was so inherently mixed and commingled with the drug trade, it was found that the best course of action to combat that was to use that two-front fight that we just talked about of combating not only the terror people, the people that are causing the violence, but the drug trade that's funding that. And so how do we connect those two? How do we connect the drugs and the violence and make it terror as opposed to just a criminal activity? Because as we said at the beginning of the semester, there's a difference between just violent crime and violent terrorism. By definition, there has to be some sort of governmental or organizational involvement or minds that need to be changed, whereas a street crime, a violent street crime, is just merely for profit. And the connection, as we look at it, is the fact that these drug cartels are using the violence that they perpetrate to discourage enforcement of the laws that they're breaking. So if you see in Mexico a lot of political assassinations or kidnapping or extortions, the crimes that we listed in that definition, all those crimes are being conducted in Mexico, not out of pure profit. There's not a lot of a profit in murder per se, but if you commit enough murders of enough of the right people, then perhaps folks will be discouraged from trying to come down on your drug trade or come down on their drug trade. And so they're using that violence to gain political or economic influence. And that's why there's a definitional connection between the drug trade violence and the cartels. So I just wanted to touch on that real briefly today and let you get back to your reading. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Even though I'm on the road, I'm always available if you have any questions. The tests, as we've discussed in the past, I have reviewed each of the tests for this week to ensure that there is that they are accurate and the materials can be found in the book. And if there's any issue or if you feel as though one of the questions needs to be challenged, by all means, I encourage you to reach out. I can tell you that each of those questions can be found in the chapters. And if you want to discuss that further, please reach out. Until then, I look forward to reading your discussion board posts this week. And absolutely, please reach ahead to week 9, read the instructions for your 4-page paper, and please begin working on that. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week.